In this episode of the Toolbox, I'm going to talk about some of the research behind how adults learn, what programmers do, and how I approach learning as a professional student. I've also got some great demos of GitHub's new code search engine, the best new terminal I've seen in ages called Warp, and yes, I do have some invites. The pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello everyone, this is Ray Villalobos, and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Follow me and subscribe on all the social media things for more content. Now, if you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look on my blog, raybo.org. So my dad worked for a big bank, and when I graduated from 10th grade, we all moved to Chile. And I had already taken my very first basic computer class in Puerto Rico, so I ended up signing up for a programming class at this new school. However, when I got there, it was almost like 3/4 of the way of the semester, so it was pretty much almost over. And the teacher couldn't really tell me or really do the entire class for me again, so he handed me the book. He said he could help me one-on-one whenever I needed it, but then he gave me a bunch of problems to solve. And as long as I finished the problems, I could get a passing grade. Now, that experience really changed my life, and to this day, I've learned the value of how to study, and it's only recently that I learned that adult learning is actually a pretty well-researched topic. So today I wanted to talk about some of the things I do, and hopefully it's something that can help you. Now, before I get into that, I do want to talk about a couple of new tools that I think you should know about. They're a little bit related to the topic today. So the first tool is the GitHub code search engine. This is pretty neat, and I just got an invite a couple days ago. So if you go to cs.github.com, that's the URL of the site. I do hope they get a different URL because I feel like, I get it, it's computer science or code search.github.com, I guess. But I feel like it needs something a little more snappy. So they're pretty good. And I think that you'll be able to hopefully see it soon. So if you go there, you may get, sort of a sign-up sheet that if you have a GitHub account, it asks you to sign up and it'll give you an invite. But it's sort of, most developers do use Google really to search for code. So this is sort of a new way of doing search specifically for code, obviously, that is on GitHub, but it's really powerful. And a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how this new programming language called Rust is really taking over the web. Whenever sort of mission critical things are happening that require a lot of speed, people are programming things in Rust. And sure enough, this particular search engine is actually written in Rust, and it's super fast. Rust is like a compiled language that will compile to JavaScript or something that you can run on the browser. So definitely it's something that you should take a look at learning in the next year. I think it provides, presents an opportunity. So what you're seeing is either entire things or parts of bigger projects. So for example, I think Vite uses part of Vite are written in Rust. And parts, I think, of Next.js. So there's a lot of work being done with Rust. So definitely check it out if you can. We do have a course on LinkedIn Learning on Rust, by the way. So this is interesting because I've always been able to search for code using GitHub. So if you go to GitHub, then you can just very quickly do a search. You can actually just type S and do a search. And you can also just do a question mark to get all of the commands. So you can open a command palette with Command Shift K just in GitHub. But this is actually a separate project that puts everything on a different URL. And I think it's a little bit better. It really focuses. So when I do searches on GitHub, it's pretty much to search my own repos. And it's not that it's cumbersome, but it's just sort of different. So this is interesting that they're providing sort of a different way of doing this. Now here you can, for example, select different scopes. So scopes allow you to search for a specific repository. So in this case, it gives you my repository. This will be obviously yours, but then you can also define custom scopes. So for example, we have another sort of team called LinkedIn Learning here where we put all the code for our courses, and you can check this out and create sort of a custom way to search in here. So that's pretty cool. There's also some shortcuts. So you can actually type in here just whatever you want. So you could say something like Markdown, slides, or something like that. And it's going to search within the specific team. So let's go ahead and switch that to Planet of the Web. And it's just going to find everything. You see how quick it is. It's really very responsive. The thing that's different about this search engine is that whenever you click on code, it's going to take you to that code segment. And it's giving you sort of a search just like you would in a text editor. It feels like a piece of Visual Studio Code. When you take a look at this, the editor is pretty cool. And you can actually also highlight multiple lines like this. And another thing that I thought was pretty awesome is that you can actually jump straight into the code once you do a search. If you want to jump straight into the code, just like you can with GitHub, you can just hit the period key. And this is actually going to launch a code space with that file open and let you just get in there and edit the file. So very quickly launch the code space with that result, and it lets me go in there and edit that piece of code. Now this is still under beta, so not everything's perfect. I can see that it's not really giving me syntax highlighting here, although this is Markdown, so this is maybe a little bit tricky. So perhaps something like JavaScript, it would be a little bit better at. So there's also a lot of different, so here's how you do scope searches. You can, just like you could do this in GitHub as well. You can type in like org : and then a specific organization, and then type in some other qualifiers that allow you to sort of customize the search and get you whatever you want. The other cool thing is you can do file paths. So you can type in, and notice this one right here is actually a regular expression. So if you add slashes to your text, it allows you to do a regular expression search, which I'm not sure if you could do that just with the regular GitHub search. Hold on. The live broadcast isn't streaming on LinkedIn. Okay, that's weird. Oh, great. So give me a second here. I'm not sure why this would not be streaming on LinkedIn. But however, you can catch this thing on YouTube if you want to see it. So let me take a break here to address that. So looks like some people are saying that you can't see it on LinkedIn. That's weird. I am getting some people from YouTube actually. So everybody's coming in through YouTube right now because it's streaming there. Okay. I'm not really sure what is happening. Let me see if I can very quickly go over into my Restream account, which is how this gets rebroadcast to LinkedIn. So sometimes things lose connections. So let me just check it really quick. Let's see, redirecting to live event. And it does say that it's sending the data over to LinkedIn, but somehow it's not getting it. So if you are not able to see this, just go to the YouTube link. The one I added it to the chat board, or you can always find this in rabo.org. So if you go to rabo.org, although it doesn't have the right image right now, you can click here, and I think you should be able to see. Yeah, no, this is actually last week, so that's not going to work. So you'll have to go to youtube.com/Planet of the Web, and from there you should be able to see like the latest videos from there. I think there's a link of it in the chat, so I apologize. I don't know what the deal is with LinkedIn, perhaps not receiving the data, but that's that. That is what happens when you try to do like live demos. So let's just keep on going on. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do in here. I do like you can search for an exact match. I don't think I have any out of memory things for specific text within your code. And also, there's also a way of doing Boolean operators. So this looks amazing. I have been testing it out just really for the past couple of days. So I'm sure that this is going to get a lot better. I don't know if right now, if you go there, if you're going to see a sort of just a get an invite, or if they're opening it up to everyone. Usually, when they open up things, I find that unless I really bug them about it, that I get an invite, and a few days later it just releases to everyone. So I'm not really sure what would happen if you go there right now. But check it out. It's a pretty cool editor. I mean, it's a pretty cool search engine that I think is going to make a big difference when you have to do complex things. It has a nice little sort of a reference for the queries and stuff. All right, the other thing that I wanted to show you was actually this other terminal called Warp. And this is one that I had actually applied to be in their sort of access program a long time ago. Like I requested access for this a few months ago. And the terminal that I've been using for years has been Hyper. It was created by what is now Vercel, used to be called Now. I love Hyper, and I had a lot of hopes for it, but it kind of feels like the development for it has been abandoned. So this group right here created this amazing new terminal that feels very modern. And once again, it feels like you're inside a copy of Visual Studio Code when you're working with the terminal. So let's see if I can pull it up here. So I do have, let's see, here's the Warp terminal. And you can see that it has a command palette, so it feels very Visual Studio Code-y, I guess. And there's all these different commands that you can go to right here. You can also do Control-R for looking at the previous commands that you have issued. So, I use like Oh My Seashell, or Oh My, however you say it. And it's a fantastic shell for Hyper, but it definitely feels very hacky. Like it doesn't feel like a normal sort of way of dealing with like a regular Mac OS sort of feel to it. So I do think that this is super modern. The one thing that it allows you to do is once you start issuing commands. So I have a shortcut called DSK that takes me to my desktop where I can find all my files. Notice that if I type it though, I don't know if you could see this well. If I type that command in here though, it actually looks up previous commands that I have given, and it's given me sort of a potential command that I have typed in before that I can type in again. And notice that it's also a multi-line command. So if you hit the Shift Return, you can type in another command here. So maybe you could do an ls and then do cd maybe here, photos. And so let's just do that. And it's going to execute all those commands in sequence and show you that you're in this current directory. So let's do, again, dsk. And if I want to issue this command, I can just hit the right arrow, and it takes, it forwards all those different screens and lets me execute this command if I want to, which is cool. So actually, that's the command I already did. I can go up and take a look at the fact that I have a command right here that switches me to my desktop, then switches to the Photos folder. And then I have a bash script that essentially lets me create thumbnails from within any folder. So I usually put a bunch of photos in there, and I execute this sequence of commands, and it does them all in sequence. So I can just hit return here, and it's going to run my bash script and generate my thumbnails. And I can now do ls to take a look at what's in that folder. So if you notice, every time you type a command, it goes into a little block, and you can navigate up and down these different blocks. And there's also a little sort of 3 dots right here that allows you to do different things within a specific block. So if you type in a bunch of commands, you can do a search within the block, you can do a search, re-input the command, or you can actually copy the output. Sometimes all you're looking for is a specific maybe output of a file. Maybe you're doing some complex pipe commands. And so you can just copy the output, copy the specific command, copy both of them, or do a little search. So there's a lot of other things that you can do with this tool. I think that you're really going to love this terminal. Honestly, I've only had it for a few days, but when I go back into Visual Studio Code, I'm sort of depressed that I have to use the regular terminal, even though it has Oh My Seashell installed, and I have some additional other things that I love in there. It's just this is just so much superior than what I've used before. And you can see here that it can also be themed. It's a native first browser, and you can let's see, you can do all kinds of cool things. Look like real-time collaboration. So it's almost like they took a version of Visual Studio Code and they kind of made a browser out of it. I wouldn't be surprised if they get bought by somebody, because this is so amazing. And if you think about it, I mean, one of the Vercel, again, who used to be Now, got a lot of their start by creating that original browser. Everybody loved it because terminals are a little bit, I don't know, they feel like they were made like 20 years ago. So to see a modern terminal is pretty exciting. And I do have about 10 invites that I can give away to this. So if you want to get an invite to it, send me a note on LinkedIn. Just send me a message on LinkedIn, and I will just give away like 10 invites to the first 10 people that just send me an email or something. Like if you're already follow me, then you can just send me a note. And otherwise, check it out. It's pretty awesome. Multi-line commands, super awesome. Like I said, I don't ever want to do the terminal in any other way again. It's too good of a thing to want to go back. So, all right, let's keep on going. So, yeah, GitHub code search and Warp terminal, pretty awesome. Let me take a look if there's any questions in the chat. I've got a little bit thrown off by like some of the problems here with LinkedIn. Yeah, it looks super awesome. Multi-line commands, very interesting. Super, and it's not just interesting, it's amazing. And the multiple cursor is kind of cool too, so you could see a little bit of it kind of playing right now. That you can, I think you can hit Command click, 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 or you can use like the shortcuts as well. You can do Command D. I mean, I think you're gonna start sort of queuing up a series of commands with this a lot more than you've done before. And all those commands are always saved in the cache, so you can always go back to complex commands. So that is pretty cool. Yes, I was saying something. Yeah, I was saying something about the best way to learn JS. So I'm gonna get into that in just a minute. Or anything else. Let's see. I made it to the stream. Yeah, thanks for coming. So that's another. I do have a YouTube channel, and I simulcast to I think like YouTube and Twitter and lots of other places. So good to have a backup. I don't know what's happening with LinkedIn, but it could just be a temporary thing. So make sure you watch this on YouTube if you can. And thank you, Dewana. Dewana, my friend, is sort of checking out the Q&A so that she can answer questions if you have them. Thank goodness today, because I really needed that today since I didn't know that was going to happen. So let's talk a little bit about learning. And the thing is that a lot of people think that I spend most of my time teaching. And the reality is that most of my time is actually spent writing for teaching. So I write a lot. Whenever you see a course that I've done, I spend like 90% of the time writing the thing and, doing, preparing like demos and code and stuff like that. And then 10% of the time, like very little time gets spent actually recording. A lot of the work is just editing things. But ever since I took that class in high school, my approach hasn't really changed that much. And it really goes something like this. I start out by reading things or watching videos. I do learn a lot from watching videos. And the very first thing that you need to develop in order to learn new things is giving yourself the permission as well as the time to learn. You need to understand that if you don't give yourself the time, then you're really not going to grow as a developer. So if I always figure that it's a formula. If it takes 30 minutes to learn something that's going to eventually save me hours, then it makes a lot of sense to spend the time learning it. And I learn by reading and reading docs and watching videos and reading, articles. But it doesn't really matter how you learn. Everybody enjoys a different way of learning. But the important thing is to make sure that you make enough time for that. Now, the other thing that I do is I take notes, and I think my notes are a little bit different than most people's notes. So the way that I look at note taking is by focusing on notes that let me know something that I want to practice later. So since I learned so much from videos and documentation and articles, all that stuff is easily bookmarked. So I don't write a lot of notes that are just sort of a copy of what people are saying. I can always go back to that. But for me, the notes are a way to mark things that I want to learn later. So that's the key about my notes. So there's actually some really good research done on this. And here's a PDF that you can read about if you enjoy reading research, which looks a lot like this. This research essentially talks about how the key to taking useful notes is to not just take the notes, but then as soon as possible, take time to rewrite the notes, first of all. So, when you are listening to somebody at a conference, it goes by very fast and you're just taking a lot of stuff down. If they have a break, as soon as possible, go ahead and rewrite them. That'll reinforce and also let you sort of mark what you think you need to come back to later. And after you rewrite them, then practice with them. That note-taking process is going to allow you to make a learning plan for later on, which is what you want to do. I know that I've been to lots of conferences and they're great, but unless I write things down and then I sort of make a plan of what I want to come back to later, the conference talks aren't really all that useful. So make sure that you do that. The next thing I would say is that as soon as possible, you want to practice what you've learned. So it's tough to learn something well if it's not going to be something that's going to be useful to you in the future. So reading documentation is a waste unless you're willing to do something with what you're learning. And, it's okay to read documentation as reference. But if you're reading from documentation, a lot of times you'll see that the examples are very vague and not realistic. So try to think about how you can convert what they're giving you in the documentation to something more practical. How could I use this in real life? And I'll get into why that's really important a little bit later when I talk about the principles of adult learning. Now, we all get these code screenshots and code snippets on social media. So I did a video on an example of how I go about learning something or how I sort of practice learning as an exercise. I get those screenshots a lot. So what I like to do is just modify them. It's a shame that they don't all get typed in, that you're just seeing the problem. So I'm going to give you an example of something that I would do to sort of take advantage of those code screenshots and how I can use them to learn something. My social media timeline is often full of code screenshots that looks like this meme from Reddit. These short snippets of code can be a good exercise to practice how to approach learning. So I went ahead and typed all this in and created a GitHub repo if you want to follow along. So what's the correct answer that would get you a free drink? Well, that depends. Now, technically, this code doesn't output anything. There isn't any console log statement. So you could argue that with the bartender, but it probably won't get you a free drink. Let's go ahead and fix that. Now, once you do that, you realize that the output of the code is undefined.secretword:parameters. Now, you probably get the drink if you tell the bartender that the secret word is parameters. You may have some arguments about that undefined statement. What if the bartender mentioned that you needed that undefined statement? And why is that even happening? The culprit is on line 1. This would be better if you made an assignment with the declaration. Now the output looks weird with the period, so you can tell the bartender that this is definitely code from a junior developer, but that might get you kicked out of the bar. You probably noticed that the developer is using var instead of the newer let or const. Which one should you really use? To me, it doesn't really matter as long as you understand how they are different. The value of the your drink variable doesn't change in the code. So I guess if I was pressed, I'd use a const, but it's practically irrelevant to the result and a bit of a red herring. The next bit of code is a function that takes in a value and returns a reverse string. Now this is a pretty common pattern, but I was wondering if there's an easier way to do this. Splitting into empty strings from the parameter seems a bit weird. I did a quick search on MDN for the reverse method, and I remembered that it's really meant for arrays, and that's why we're splitting this string first. The split function will take our string and convert it into an array of letters. Then we reverse the array, and then we join them back together. It's a little bit cumbersome, and I did a search on Stack Overflow, which didn't seem to help. Although this last idea looked sort of interesting, using the spread operator here instead of splitting the string, I'm not sure that's any clearer than what we're already doing. We could try to modernize this method by rewriting it to use arrow functions. I like more descriptive variable names, so I'm going to change this s variable to something like my string. That does look nicer, but I'm always wondering if the function declaration syntax wasn't clearer for something like this. Let's take a look at the object definition. It starts off with 3 strings. Now the second one calls our previous method. I wonder if I could just move the functionality of that method inside the object. It's only being used once, so that sort of makes sense, but you can't really use the method anywhere else. So I thought I might create the reverse as a method of the object instead. The reason I can't use the arrow function here is that it doesn't work well inside an object. That's because arrow functions don't have a proper understanding of the this keyword. Now I need to update the call on the request method to use my new reverse method. Now I can delete the arrow function and also the transformation right here. Now at this point, I have to be wondering what my goal is here. I think this type of problem that isn't particularly stressful and where there isn't really a correct answer is more of an exercise on how to look at problems can help you become a better developer. And maybe that's the point. So you can see that the important thing is to try to go through an exercise like that where it doesn't really matter actually what the code was. What was going through that process of trying to figure what the code is trying to do, find ways of changing it to make it perhaps better. I'm not sure that I actually was successful in making that better, but it helped me review, for example, what the reverse method in JavaScript did. And it made me go to Stack Overflow, to MDN to look at the documentation. All those things are fantastic ways to not just learn new things, but also to reinforce what you already know. A lot of times, especially with documentation, it has way too many things in it. So unless you do some sort of practice, you're not really going to retain it. Now, the next thing that I have is making sure that this is kind of weird, and I know that it seems like it's something that only I do, but you should try to teach what you've learned as soon as possible. This is one secret that all teachers know. The best way to truly understand something is to try to explain it to somebody else, because you only think you know it until you have to explain it. I know that, doing something, doing courses and code samples that get immediately looked at by everyone is a really good incentive to try to get everything right. So when I am teaching something, I'm often making sure that I'm reviewing the docs to make sure that what I'm saying is accurate, because I could be saying something that isn't right, and that's never a good thing when you're teaching others. And so you can, for example, make sure that, if you're in a team, you could have a meeting once a week where say if you have like 6 team members, everybody gets to present something every other week or something. Something like the exercise that I just went through, I think would be super beneficial for a lot of people. In my case, in high school, I immediately signed up to be a lab assistant. That next semester, the last year in high school. And then I did the same thing in college. Actually, that's how I earned some money in college. And I learned way more than I would have ever learned from just trying to read a book. Running into problems from third parties and helping people solve those problems can teach you so much. So if you have a chance, find a way of teaching things yourself. So I found some interesting research about developers from one of my favorite surveys, which is the Stack Overflow surveys. That is a survey that happens once a year. Last time it got about 80,000 respondents. So I gathered some of the data about developers. Number one is that 75% of developers have learned something new within every few months, and I think it's really honestly a consistent things, or once a year. And this could actually just be like a whole new language that you're learning. So learning is just really part of a developer's life. And most developers spend a lot of time learning new things. So that learning frequency is really important. Also, 60% of developers look things up, and I think that the other 40% are probably lying. So when you're learning how to code, most people reach for online resources first, and most people specifically look for Google. So 60% of respondents learn how to code from online resources, and the younger people tend to look up online resources more, whereas older people use books. So everybody looks it up. Don't be afraid. And out of the people that look it up, 90% of the people Google it. That's interesting. I guess other people use other things, but most people just Google. Sorry, this is actually the wrong link here. But most people actually just Google things up. Google things. When I was getting started, I would have like these really thick manuals that were like the JavaScript Bible and the CSS Bible. And what I always thought is, as soon as these things get printed, they're completely out of date because the languages have already changed. So really, the Mozilla Developer Network is usually where I go first to look things up. But Google, of course, is a great search engine. We talked about the new code search from GitHub as well. And this is interesting that most people that look things up, the first link that they see is actually already changed color because it's something that they've already looked up before. So they feel like, oh, I already looked this up, and that's perfectly fine. Like, I don't know everything, and as a matter of fact, I don't want to know everything. I think I'm more like Sherlock Holmes, who used to say that he didn't like storing things in his brain that didn't really matter to him. So, for example, he didn't know that the Earth revolved around the sun because it really didn't matter to him. Most people look things up, and it's okay if you look it up again. Shockingly enough, I often look up my own courses to find out what I have. If I'm trying to answer a question about a project, I often look at my own stuff because I feel like, okay, that gentleman really seems to know what he's talking about. And it reminds me of stuff that I have done. Interestingly enough, 80% of respondents had higher education degrees. Now, this doesn't mean that they were specifically computer science degrees. So 70% of all respondents and 80% of professional developers completed some form of higher education. A lot of times it may be a degree in a non-related field, but still, it's sort of interesting data. And 85% of them thought that it was at least important to have a degree. I know there's a big debate as to whether or not you need it. I don't think you need a degree, but it's sort of another way of qualifying people especially who are applying for jobs. So definitely something interesting to know. So next up, I just want to talk about these principles called Andragogy, which is the principles of how adults appreciate learning things. And this is what I mean by a lot. When I was a kid, I didn't really know that what I was doing had actually been well researched since the 70s. And it has to deal with how adults learn new things. And there are 6 different principles. Actually, I think it's 5 or 6, depending on which paper you're checking out. So the principles are pretty self-explanatory. prior experience. Different people have different levels of experience. And then people like to have control of how they learn. So those are generic concepts that I don't really want to get into because they're pretty self-explanatory. However, there's a couple of other concepts that I think are really important to how you should try to learn. So, for example, motivation. Learners are motivated by certain pressures. So if you're trying to learn something, but there's no reason to learn it, you're probably going to forget it really quick. So you have to try to, as much as possible, give yourselves reasons for trying to learn new things. You can be motivated by, on the long term, by things like salary and a new job title. But the ones that work the best are things like job satisfaction, self-esteem, and quality of life. So for me, what I try to do is whenever I'm trying to learn something new, I try to figure out what I call the killer app is, what the killer feature of a new product is. So for example, with like React, it was the virtual DOM, and with Svelte, shockingly enough, it was getting rid of the virtual DOM. Why is that important, and why is that going to be something that makes my development better? So with everything that I'm trying to learn, that is the first thing that I look for. What is my motivation for learning? Why should I spend any amount of time learning something that's completely different than what I'm already doing? So if you try to find that, then you're going to be more motivated to learn something quickly. Readiness, it means that you also tend to not learn things until you really need to know it because of something. So this is why I recommend teaching things to other people and having like some sort of deadline, giving yourself artificial deadlines, so that, for example, I have a live stream that I do every week. I have to prep for it. So I had to create that video that you just saw a minute ago. So those are all encouragements for me to learn something new every week, which is something I normally did. But by having that additional added pressure, it's going to satisfy that principle of readiness. I only want to learn something if I really have to know it for some sort of deadline or some sort of things. So you could write a blog post about it. A lot of blogs started out by being essentially some sort of developer that just wanted to write a note so that they would remember something or really learn how to do something. That's definitely a good thing. Also, having this weekly stream is what works for me. So make it a point that if you're a boss, especially, to ask your workers to bring maybe a new topic to a meeting and share what you have learned with each other, because that can be really powerful. And then orientation. This is interesting too, because it's really something that I've always focused on, and that is that people want to learn solutions to real problems. A lot of times the documentation is written from a conceptual standpoint, and the problems that they offer aren't real problems. So whenever I do a course, I try to create a realistic project to go with the topic that I'm covering, or I try to create a realistic example, because the more realistic it is, the more interested people will be to learn something, if it relates to something that they can understand and maybe relate to in a variety of ways. So I actually did a new course that I'm really excited about called JavaScript as a Second Language that kind of uses those principles. I want to play a video on the try-catch statements in JavaScript that shows you a little bit of what I'm talking about and how I try to approach not just learning the conceptual part of how to learn something, but then also try to come up with an example that at least is relatable by people. JavaScript has specialized statements called try-catch that make it easier to deal with bugs. Now, there's actually three parts in the try-catch family of statements. The try part lets you attempt to perform a series of statements. If any of these statements fail, the rest of the statements won't run. What I did here was call a function that doesn't exist. The error in line 3 will prevent line 4 and anything else after that from running. Next is the catch line. Now, this looks like a function that receives a parameter and will run when an error is found in the try statement. You can output the entire error using the variable, or the different parts of the error object, mainly the name of the error as well as a message. Finally, if you want something to run regardless of whether or not things work, you can use the optional finally statement here. Let's say you have a pest control business. It's doing great, but you realize that as you get new employees, they're going to need a bit of training. So you decide to build an app. Your app will allow employees to submit a description of a bug and then get a list of possible matches from a database you'll build. First, you start thinking about the data you'll need to gather. You think of things like whether the bug has antenna, the size, and other identifiers. The try-catch statement has another trick. You can perform a specialized if statement that lets you control the message that will be output to the console. We can check, for example, the type of variable so we can make sure that our antenna variable comes in as a Boolean and not a string. If it doesn't, we can throw an error directly into the console. We can check to see if either of the sizes are within certain parameters. Think any bug bigger than 6 inches is probably a call to animal control and not us. We can also make sure that the amount of legs matches in pairs by using the modulos operator here. We'll also check to see if some values are within a predefined set of values. If our tests pass, we can pass along the text checks passed to the console. Of course, you need the catch statement to output the message, if needed. A building task for your apps is going to make you a better programmer. It helps you find bugs before they become a nuisance, which might also work as a pest control company motto. So I'm pretty proud of that course. I think that it encapsulates everything that I know about learning, and I really tried to make it super fun by giving you a lot of graphics and trying to give you problems that were at least relatable. So if you like that, make sure you go watch the course. It's called JavaScript as a Second Language. I'm really proud of it, and I'm hoping that they let me do more of that type of stuff. So I'd appreciate it if you give it a good rating and just check it out. I did want to brag on one of the regular viewers of the show, Peter Easterbrook. Last week, he had a really good question, and he was wondering about different React charting libraries. He wanted to try some of them. So I did a little bit of research on them, and I found this pretty cool article that talked about the different chart libraries in 2020. You can tell that it's a little bit of a, a clickbaity article, but there's a lot of cool chart libraries in here that I thought were good. So we talked about these online and just send ourselves some different messages looking at some of these. So pretty cool. A lot of these are kind of based on D3, and some of them are easier to use than other. And so Peter actually did a demo of this. So I'm going to show you his cool little demo that I think really encapsulates. It looks fantastic. I mean, it has some interactivity right here. And, this is, I think, actual temperature. It has like light and dark mode built in. It's a nice little demo of how to, a typical sort of project that you would build yourself. The nice thing is that the way that we learn is by immediacy, the fact that you want to finish something and perhaps you have a reason to finish that. But then it's always the fact that you actually do something with what you're trying to learn that helps you get to that next level. And that's really what all training is about. It's not just listening to a conference talk or listening to me say something, but giving yourself time as well as giving yourself the permission, and then also creating some reasons to learn, plus giving yourself assignments and practicing on things that are realistic and that are meaningful to you to achieve your goals. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter. That was really nice to see that coming from you. That was great because it's really something that happened in the last episode. And then we kind of worked on it a little bit together, mostly him. I remember he sent me a note that it was a lot of coffee. There was a lot of coffee involved in finishing this project. But I'm super proud of you and super proud of just that sort of desire to go learn something by doing something. That's really the key to learning, and the way that I first sort of realized the power of working on on realistic things is really, for me, the only way to learn, and it's how I approach a lot of my teaching. So let's see if there's any other questions. So I don't really see a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, this is cool from Tomas. According to William Glasser, we learn 10% from what we read, 20% from what we hear, 30% from what we see, and 80% from what we taste. And interesting. So 95% from what we teach others. Yeah, it's definitely true. I know that I am like very sort of lucky to have a job where I get to like teach others, because that's the only way that I can learn things, by sort of translating knowledge into action. So let's see. Cool. So Tomas also says that he prefers a getting started guide when I can create something basic and functional. Yeah, I think that's, if you looked at the JavaScript as a second language, I do like to go through and understand the concepts, but then I need to translate them, hopefully into like an app or something to go beyond. Because I think like, and this is why I do project-based courses so much, it's because when you're reading just the documentation, it doesn't show you how those things sort of translate into a realistic environment. So usually there's connections between different methods that need to interact with each other. Things change when you add realistic type data to a project. You design it differently for sure when things need to fit differently than what you've things. You know, when you design things, when you have real data, it makes a huge difference. So definitely, this is a good approach, but definitely, try to sort of turn it into, something realistic as soon as possible, because it'll give you a lot of benefits. So let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, there's a bunch of hellos. And cool. So I apologize for the problems. I have no idea what that was. I'm gonna have to maybe see if I can repost it somehow into LinkedIn again. So hello, Victor. Hello, everyone. Let's see something. Yeah. So yeah. Yes. And also, yeah. Send me. So this is regarding the Warp terminal. If you're interested, just send me an email on LinkedIn, and I have a few invites to give away. So make sure you do that if you have the time. So hello, Victor from Switzerland. So it looks like, at least, if anything else, a lot of people discovered that I also simulcast on YouTube, and sometimes, having a safety like that is a great way to go. So that's all I have for time. And hopefully I will see you guys. I'm not going to do an episode next week. I really have to focus on a course that I have to release. But then I'll be back the week after for a new episode. So see you then.